Imagine staying awake for 30 straight days. No rest, no closing your eyes, your body begging for sleep, but something stopping you from shutting off. Now, what if I told you that a secret experiment tried to do just that? The goal seemed simple, to test the limits of the human mind. But what happened inside that chamber went far beyond the boundaries of science and sanity. 5 men were locked in, monitored by scientists who believed they had everything under control. But when the microphones started picking up sounds that defied explanation, they realized they had unleashed something far darker than they ever imagined. What really happened in there? Why were the records of this experiment hidden for so long? And the most disturbing question, could this story be true? During the Cold War, the world was caught in a silent battle among the superpowers. It wasn't just about nuclear weapons and espionage. It was also about secret experiments that defied human understanding. Among these projects was one that few dared to mention, a test to eliminate the need for sleep. The idea was simple, yet terrifying. If it were possible to keep soldiers awake for extended periods without compromising their sanity, the strategic advantage would be immeasurable. Sleep deprivation had always been used as a method of torture. But what if it could be turned into a weapon? A way to create warriors who never needed to rest. That's how a group of Soviet scientists began developing an experimental gas, a substance that promised to keep anyone awake for weeks without exhaustion. But to test its effects, they needed human test subjects. And who better for the job than those already condemned to oblivion? Political prisoners, men the government deemed disposable, were chosen. The promise was tantalizing. If they survived the experiment, their freedom would be restored. But what awaited them inside that chamber was far worse than mere imprisonment. The experiment's environment was meticulously planned. The scientists needed to observe every detail without directly interfering. So they built a sealed chamber, equipped with microphones and small reinforced glass windows. The space was cramped and claustrophobic, with cold steel walls and dim lighting designed to disorient the prisoners. Inside the chamber, there were only basic beds, without mattresses. In addition, the participants were given dehydrated food, water, and a small collection of books. No mirrors, no contact with the outside world. The only sound besides their own voices was the constant hum of the cameras and the ventilation system. The rules were straightforward. They'd stay there for 30 days, continuously breathing the experimental gas that would keep them awake. If they could make it to the end, they'd be set free. At first, the idea seemed simple, but no one knew exactly how the gas would affect their minds over time. At first, the prisoners chatted amongst themselves, trying to distract their minds. But as the hours and days piled up, the atmosphere began to change. Small signs of unease started to emerge. And what initially looked like a psychological experiment soon turned into an inescapable nightmare. During the first few days, everything seemed to be within expectations. The prisoners showed signs of fatigue and irritability, but nothing alarming. They talked with each other, read the available books, and tried to keep their minds occupied. Some even joked that they'd easily last until the end of the experiment. However, as time went on, the mood inside the chamber began to shift. By the 5th day without sleep, patients gave way to frustration. Conversations became more aggressive, and minor disagreements escalated into heated arguments. Laughter disappeared. The silence, which once signified rest, now felt eerie. On the 8th day, the first sign of collapse appeared. One of the prisoners started pacing in endless circles, muttering to himself. Another sat in a corner, staring at the wall as if he were hearing something no one else could. And then, the first scream came. It was a desperate sound. One of the men screamed for hours on end until his voice completely gave out. Even then, he kept opening his mouth, trying to make sounds that just wouldn't come out. Meanwhile, the others began exhibiting strange behaviors. Unintelligible whispers, vacant stares, and repetitive movements. Something inside them was changing. On the 10th day, something unexplainable happened. After days of hearing incessant whispers, screams, and murmurs, the microphones picked up absolute silence. No conversation, no sound of movement. Nothing, just a disturbing void. The scientists tried to communicate via the intercom, but received no response. The tension grew by the minute. Should they open the chamber? Something was holding them back from acting immediately. It was as if that silence carried a dark warning, as if something was waiting for them on the other side. When they finally decided to shut off the gas to test the prisoner's reaction, something unexpected occurred. One of them screamed in desperation, as if he were being burned alive. "Turn the gas back on. We need it." The plea was accompanied by a muffled sound, as if someone were frantically scratching at the metal walls. Alarmed, the scientists decided to open the chamber. When the door lifted and fresh air flooded in, what they saw would haunt them forever. Instead of 5 prisoners, there were now unrecognizable beings, covered in blood, eyes wide open, bodies mutilated, and expressions mixing agony with ecstasy. The experiment hadn't just failed, it had created something new, something inhuman. The stench of blood filled the air. The chamber's walls were stained with a substance the scientists were reluctant to identify immediately. But what terrified them the most was the look in the survivors' eyes. They didn't seem pleading or even scared. On the contrary, there was a strange glimmer in their eyes, as if they had discovered something that no one else could ever understand. The bodies were mutilated in ways that defied explanation. Chunks of flesh had been torn away. Organs were exposed, yet none of the prisoners appeared to feel pain. They didn't even try to protect themselves. Instead, they refused to leave, clinging to the walls and floor, begging for the gas to be turned back on. One of the researchers, trying to figure out what was happening, stepped closer and asked, "What happened here? What are you?" The answer came in an eerily calm tone. One of the prisoners gave a slight smile and said, "We are you. We are the madness that lives within every human being." The ensuing silence was more deafening than any scream. The scientists exchanged glances, unable to process what they had just heard. Those men were no longer the same individuals who had entered that chamber. Something within them had awakened, and perhaps that something had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to break free. Faced with absolute horror, the scientists knew they couldn't go on. The experiment had pushed past any imaginable limit. The order was given. Shut everything down immediately. But when soldiers stormed in to forcibly remove the prisoners, they realized the situation was far beyond their control. The first to be released reacted with superhuman strength, attacking the guards violently. It took several men to subdue him, but even after being shot, he kept fighting as if he felt no pain. His eyes, wide and deranged, seemed fixed on something that no one else could see. The others began yelling and thrashing, refusing to leave. "We need the gas," they pleaded, their voices a mix of desperation and craving. One by one, the prisoners were restrained. But when only one remained, the last survivor, something even more disturbing happened. He stared fixedly at the nearest scientist, as if he could see right into his soul. Then, in an almost whispered tone, he uttered his final words before finally succumbing. "So close to freedom." And then, it was all over. But those who witnessed the experiment were never the same again. The question that no one dared to ask was simple, yet terrifying. What really happened inside that chamber? The Russian sleep experiment became one of the internet's most macabre stories. But was it just an urban legend? Or is there something true behind this account? Most experts believe this story emerged as a creepypasta, a horror tale created to scare and entertain. However, there are historical records suggesting that extreme sleep deprivation was indeed studied in military experiments. Declassified Cold War documents indicate that both the United States and the Soviet Union conducted tests involving sleep deprivation and hallucinogenic drugs. Reports from soldiers subjected to prolonged periods without rest show that hallucinations, extreme paranoia, and even violent outbursts can occur. But did any of these tests reach the level described in the story? If so, the true results were never made public. After all, what happened in that chamber might never have been recorded on paper. But the idea behind the experiment remains one of humanity's greatest fears. What if madness is a natural state in every human, just waiting for the right moment to break free? The story of the Russian sleep experiment may be nothing more than a chilling tale, or perhaps an echo of something far darker that never saw the light of day. What would really happen if the human mind were pushed beyond its limits? Are we closer to insanity than we think? Maybe this story was created to remind us of something we'd rather ignore. The mind can be our greatest ally or our worst enemy. And what if what we call reason is merely a thin layer covering an abyss of madness? But now I ask you, do you think this experiment really happened? Or is it just a well-crafted myth? Are there secrets from the past that should never be revealed? Let me know what you think about this story in the comments. And if you want to dive even deeper into forbidden mysteries and chilling tales, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There are still many hidden secrets waiting to be uncovered.